y'all doing, everyone? As many of you know from one of my previous videos involves a quick book review of some of the volumes from the Time Life Books Enchanted World series. And, well, that was just a quick review of some of the volumes. What I plan to do with this series, I want to go through each book, probably go through almost page for page, briefly describe some of the stories involved and some of the things that the books discuss. I only have like half the series at the time I made this video, but I just ordered from Amazon the rest of what I'm missing, so I should be able to do all of them. So, let's begin. Wizards and Witches. This one is normally the one, well, I should say, this is the one we've ordered this originally back in the 80s. This is your first volume. When they advertised this on television, it said this is your first volume we're going to get a new volume every month until they stop or you cancel your order. So Wizards and Witches got this wonderful picture of, it looks like something from Dungeons and Dragons, but this is probably something more original. In fact, let's look through and see who did the cover here. Each book will have the bibliography of the sources that for all the stories that they have, and also picture credits. Cover artwork by James C. Christensen. Aha. And the artwork, as I explained in the last video, comes from modern artists who do fantasy to old artists like Arthur Rackham and stuff like that, and classical artists, or even books from the actual medieval times, or the times where the stories were written. So they use all sorts of sources to tell us all this volume here. And as you ever get these, you got to notice the title pages. They always have these little series of artwork, and where as you turn each page, you get more and more. Sometimes they tell a little story, silent story, and all that. In this case, it's just a witch silhouette running around, kind of frighteningly, and in the end, you just see her fade off like that. But either way, let's continue on. And there's like only a little over 100 pages, and they come in like certain chapters, each dealing with some aspect of the subject that matters. Singers of World's Dawn, that talks about some of the old wizards from old mythology, singers and shapers of the world with their magics. In this case, this is Väinämöinen. I may mispronounce many of these names. Sorry about that. Väinämöinen from the Kalevala epic stories of Scandinavia. This character was most likely the inspiration of Gandalf. Tolkien knew of this guy right here, and he some stories he is a wizard, some say he's probably the likes of a god. And these are stories of him and his companions as they travel across in their epics. And also in this same chapter with Väinämöinen, they talk about Merlin and a few other wizards of ancient mythology. Like here, also part of Väinämöinen, this talks about one of his companions, Ilmarinen, the smith, a young companion of Väinämöinen, and this talks about, illustrating one of his trials to win a bride from another evil wizard. So, and again, you have the main text here, talking about some of the stories involving the characters and how they link together in theme, and then you have these little side stories here on the side. But also some are unrelated. Like this one talks about the island enchantress. This talks about Circe. And let's see, I'll go ahead and read this one. Let's see, the island enchantress. Far to the south of the lands of the first enchanters, on a forest-shrouded island of the Adriatic Sea, lived a sorceress Circe. Her companions were tame bears and wolves and swine that had once been sailors. Ever malignant, she had lured them ashore by the magic of her singing and transformed them with spells. Sailors were not her only victims. Another was a charming nymph named Scylla, whose habit it was to bathe in the edge of the island. She attracted the sorcerer's attention because of her shepherd lover, whom Circe found desirable. Circe, therefore, walked alone one night among tall pines to the palace where Scylla bathed in the mornings. She poised herself on a rock and raised high a crystal bowl she bore. Into the sea she poured a liquid green as emerald. She watched a moment while the spell-strengthened bubbles danced away and dissolved. Then, well satisfied, she disappeared. At dawn, the sweet-voiced nymph came singing to the shore. She stepped into the water, admiring the pearly tones it gave her ankles. The colors deepened to green as Scylla stepped further in, and the tide pulled at her. Then, to her horror, she saw a swirling water, a green and whirling mass, which crept slowly up her thighs and drew her down. Under the waves, Skyla changed. When her head reappeared, it was hideous, split and fanged and slavering. The voice that came from it was bestial howl. Thus transformed, Skyla became a terror to sailors of the sea. As for Circe, she lived long on her pine-covered island, although whether she enjoyed the favors of Skyla's shepherd is no one knows. For the tale does not tell what became of him. Of course, you recognize Circe and Skyla from Greek mythology, particularly of the Odyssey. Another type wizard, this is a Welsh wizard, Taliesin. Let's see, down below here it says, I am a musician and artificer like the Wern, sang the Welsh wizard Taliesin. And it was true. His songs were about creation and transformation, and it made those magical things occur. So yes, all sorts of little things in between the main narrative. Here you see a woman with a crow behind her, and there's a kid with two other people. Up here, I apologize for this glare here. I'll read out what it says here. A brew of wisdom concocted by the sorceress Ceridwen for her son instead touched a boy Gwynbach and made him a wizard. In animal forms, she pursued the boy. As an animal, she ate him. As a woman, she bore him again. Thus, by magic, he became the enchanter Taliesin. And also, when it started in this page, in the main, this is a section briefly discovering what's already described in the narrative before about Taliesin. And I guess one of it about one chasing the other by transforming, and you see that through these silhouettes. One's trying to get away, one turns into a fast predator, the other one changes to something else, change environment, and everyone follows suit. Here we go, the Wizard of Kiev. I'm sorry for mispronouncing it again. This talks about a Russian wizard who, trying to go against the Tartars of Genghis Khan, he uses his power to transform into a goat, into a bird, and uses these animal forms to disarm the army, and while his army can buy and take him over. That's very brief. I don't want to go too far into this because I want to spoil it for everybody. But if you have questions about who did the artwork and all that, sorry about that, let me know in the comments there. I'll see if I can answer it. One person asked me already in my first video, and I couldn't answer it because of some volume I didn't have yet. This is Väinämöinen again, attacking what looks like this weird harpy-like creature. But what's it say over down here? I'll read it for you while I'll point back to this picture. With Ilmarinen and Lemminkainen at his side, Väinämöinen, the steadfast, fought the storm spells and taloned anger of Louhi, the sorceress of the north. You can definitely see sort of a Gandalf reference there. And also from other wizards that you probably made up in role-playing games and such. Here we got this picture of a knight going across from the water. Some ships behind here. The little section at the bottom here reads as follows. Guardian of the Isle of Man, Väinämöinen rode a horse called Enbar, meaning splendid mane, that took him with ease over land and sea. No weapon could pierce Väinämöinen's armor. No enemy could survive his sword's thrust. That sword was called the Answerer. Well, cool picture this. If you ever try to look up Väinämöinen online, they kind of pose him as a traditional wizard-like figure. I don't know which is more accurate. Well, going on. Let's see. Cormac McArt mentioned here, hey, that was a character from Robert E. Howard. Or at least I should say Robert E. Howard named a character right after him. It looks like from we go over to Celtic mythology from then. They transition over in each chapter to different stories. And let's see, this picture here, it is a people gazing upon two dragons fighting. In his youth, Merlin the Enchanter observed a duel of dragons that was inspired to prophecy. He foresaw the rivers of England run red with the blood of battle, but he also foresaw the coming King Arthur and the glorious reign that followed. Yeah, this goes from Väinämöinen, Taliesin, and to later Merlin in his works. So you can see where the first chapter sort of blends in these wizards of legends, not necessarily evil. Or actually, none of them are evil to do a lot of great deeds. But they talk about an older time, more pagan influence. See, you got this looks like Merlin taking a child, and the caption down below. Let's see if we pose this so you get a better view of this. That should do it. Protector of Britain's future, Merlin spirited the infant Arthur away from his birthplace at the fortress at Tintagel. No one in power saw the young king until he came to claim his crown, and Merlin never told where he had hidden the child. Many of you know about that story. It's in various mythologies and legends. Let's see. Very nice drawing or woodcut there. See if I can get this. It's kind of, again, apologize for that glare. Let's see. There we go. I don't know if I can hold this. I may have to do. There we go. I'll read the caption on the side here as I try and pose that. A realm in a balance. When Merlin first brought Arthur to his throne, the king was young and battle proud. It happened that he challenged a knight named Pellinore, who was a petty king himself, to single combat. They jousted with lances, and Arthur was on horse. They dueled on foot with swords, and Pellinore won. Then Pellinore demanded that Arthur yield his knightly honor and surrender, but the king chose the death blow instead. Just as Pellinore raised his battle sword to strike, Merlin appeared beside the man and thundered what he knew: that the hope of Britain lived in King Arthur and would die with him. Heeding these words, Pellinore stayed his hand. When Merlin told the king that the mighty knight he had fought, and the knight's sons as well, would become Arthur's faithful servants, and all this happened as Merlin foretold. Now, for many of you who watched that old 80s movie of Excalibur, this reads very similar to King Arthur's fight with Sir Lancelot, but such stories come with many variations and similarities. I am skipping a page here. Yes, very nice classic picture here of King Arthur getting a sword, but let's see what the caption says here, if I could pose this right. The time came early in Arthur's reign when Merlin told the king that his true sword awaited him. Together the British king and the enchanter rode through forests and uplands until at last they came to a still mountain lake, where white swans cried softly through mist. At the verge of the lake floated a gilded boat. Arthur and Merlin stepped into it and, drawn by invisible hands, floated to the center of the waters. There a hand broke through the mist, holding up the sword Excalibur, sheathed in a jeweled scabbard. In silence, Arthur grasped the hilt. The sword would be his strength, for it was magically empowered. No enemy could defeat the king as long as he carried it, and the scabbard was an enchanted talisman against injury. That's such a wonderful picture. I love stuff like that. Here's one with Merlin against a maiden here. Let's see what it says. At the end of his life, if this tale is true, the last of the great enchanters did not die. Some say Merlin yielded to the blandishments of a fairy and slept, and she housed him in a tree to rest in safety until called to aid his countrymen once more. All right. And here you got, again, between the narratives, you will have these little short stories in between. The Welsh enchanters fosterling. This talk between two Welsh wizards, Math and Gwydion, who, one of them had a sister who had two children. One was lost. The other one they were able to find. And so they raised him. Gwydion did, but they couldn't just give him all that he wanted. You see, he needed to have a name, but only the mother could give him a name. She wouldn't give it. She was trying to get rid of him. Didn't want anything to do with it. So they tricked her into giving him a name. And they succeeded. Well, she also made it to where she vowed to where she wouldn't give him arms. He couldn't, be a lord if he can't fight. And so they tricked her into giving him arms. And of course, she made a curse or enchantment that he will never have a loving bride. So they made one for her. They made out of flowers and such. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there. She betrays him to someone else, and she found out how to kill him. See, the young fosterling was enchanted against injuries and such, except for certain ways, which she found out, told her love she was having an affair with. And so later, the two wizards, Math and Gwydion, find him and find the young lord, and they nurse him back to life. He gains his revenge, and such. So that's a very short take of what the story is. And again, I'm going to paraphrase this because, the details, delightful parts in the details. Now we go to Chapter 2, Masters of Forbidden Arts. This picture has a little description on top. In dusty scrolls and antique charts, Roger Bacon found the keys of wizardry, a wizardly power. And it starts to talking about types of wizards and such, more closer to actual medieval times, or at least, some part mythology, part medieval, because I think Roger Bacon did exist. But it talks about the more scholarly wizards, Nahum, Nostradamus, and such. Here we go. We got this, there's Roger Bacon again. With an artful wizardry, Roger Bacon shaped a formless air. He filled a palace with music, and from the harmonies fashioned dancers and a dance. An illusion that was only a pretty gift he made to pleasure his king. My guess with Roger Bacon, if he existed at all, he probably, he was a scholar, and he probably had a lot of these things described in it, but never actually performed real magical powers. He was just stories, exaggerated of all the things he can do. Here we go, of the Provencal prophet. I won't read this whole thing. This is a famous story about Nostradamus, and that he was able, he was with his reputation of predictions and such, he was invited in by this lord who wanted him to predict what type of pig, a white or a black pig, for supper. He wanted Nostradamus to predict which one, and he guessed correctly, long story short. It talks about the tarot cards, what the meanings are. This one's one of those few where you have to turn sideways to read through it. Talks about the meaning and everything, how they're laid about. Many people still believe in this sort of thing, but, I don't, but, they make for good stories. You got this interesting picture here. Let's see if I can get a better look. Guy on appears to be a piece of bone, a little island here, and the ships and all that, but what's the story about? Well, we got a description right here. Let me see if I can position that somewhat, and again, I just don't have much space to present this book in all its glory, but I may encourage you to find it yourself if this interests you. Diviners of the far north, when people talked of wizardry, their thoughts turned to Lapland and Iceland, where the sun shone at midnight, and magic was not a secret thing, but a commonplace, the foible of the north, a traveler called it. Even the Swedes, Northerners themselves, marveled at the practices of their neighbors at the top of the world. According to the Swedish Archbishop Olaf Magnusson, for instance, no northern king or commoner would risk an enterprise without first examining the future, and their wizards were expert at this. They divined clues in the darting of rabbits and reindeer, and leaping of fish and the flight of birds passing north, then south each year. They forecast by the stars that fell in the long winter night, by the wind that sang in the mountains, and by the smoky exhalations of volcanoes. But their greatest power was over their icy oceans. Magnusson told of a wizard who charmed a whalebone and rode on it across the sea, guiding it by a spell that emanated from his hands. Most wizards, however, were content to control the winds upon which seafaring northerners depend on for commerce and conquest alike. These enterprising magic workers sold ropes composed of knots of wind to merchants whose ships lay off their stormy coast. When loose, the knot in the rope freed a tranquil and pleasant breeze. The second, a boisterous wind. The third, used only at great peril, a veritable tempest. So, yes. Now, much as I love this picture, it's definitely a very, again, so much glare. But you see the sort of school, you see a guy with a spear and all that. It's a very cool picture. But up here on the top, I'll read this for you as I try to position it to, There's just no way of doing it properly. Alright, here it goes. The Black School. Some brave wizards of Europe, it was said, learned forbidden knowledge in the school presumed to be in Spain, a cavern reached by winding staircases, leading far into the earth and sealed from the sunlight by iron doors. Except for their own mornings, the scholars had a silent schooling. They saw no schoolmaster and heard no response to their questions. The answers they asked were each night appeared in the morning as letters that glowed and faded on the pages of their books or shone from their cavern walls. No servants brought the wizards' sustenance, instead a shaggy hand thrust out from the walls the food and drink they required. No fee was asked save one, that the last man to leave each class gave his body and soul to the schoolmaster, whose name was Satan. Yep. This was always an interesting section. These were talking about the demons and some of their names. This is derived from an actual old book that described the armies of hell. It even described some of the names: Urinome, or Urinome, or Urinome, however you pronounce that. Let's see. Just talked about a little bit of demonology, of what one volume book actually said. Let's see. Let's see. There's Ronwi and Zaphon, Ouroboros. They talk about here about the legion. Satan had organized a classical fashion into 6 legions. Each legion has 66 cohorts or military divisions, and each cohort had 666 companies, and each company had 6,666 soldiers. You can see the theme they go around here. And let's see. They do talk about some of the names of these. Let's see. Here we go. They talk about how when summoned, what they appear about. Its real shape, usually seen only by the scholar wizards brave enough to summon it by name, was a hideous reflection of the essential malevolent nature, a twisted mockery of the living forms of the natural world. There is Urinome, for instance, ghoulish, withered, sharp-toothed, and clawed hand and foot. Urinome was an eater of carrion. He was said to be Satan's prince of death in his services. Let's see, a demon, a runway, squat, coarse, big-eared, and betailed, could grant the understanding of all languages, a formidable weapon for spell workers. Zaphon, with his ever-present bellows, he was simply an ugly curiosity. He occupied himself, it was said, by fanning the eternal flames of hell. Ouroboros ranked high in the infernal regions. When summoned, he appeared sometimes as a man and sometimes as a horse, and he could tell the summoner the truth about all happenings in history or predict the course of events in times to come. And there's this picture right here, Astaroth. You might have seen him in various forms of fiction. Called the Grand Duke of Hell, appeared on some occasion as a party-colored man, and on others as a fallen angel that he was. His once beautiful angel's face distorted, his splendid wings dulled. He brought with him, it is said, a stench so terrible that wizards summoning him carried a silver ring, supposed to be protection against demonic miasma. Like Ouroboros, Astaroth could reveal the lost past and predict the future, and he knew the full meaning of any of the arts of man and sorcerer. No, this is not an actual witchcraft book telling you how all this happened. These are just stories, mythologies at the time, from the ancient enchanters to wizards, might dab in these type of things. These next series of pictures talk about the ever classic story of Faustus. Let's see. Trying to get the picture here to where we can look upon it while I read. Once summoned by old Faustus the wizard, the demon Mephistopheles had only to smile his secret smile and wait until the mortal sold his soul for pleasure. Then Faustus became a player and Mephistopheles the master of the show. Of course, the text gives more detail about these. These are just off the sides, brief descriptions of each. Here we got what's going on in the cave here. The setting for the first act of Faustus' new carrier was the cavern of a witch who pleased the old man's vanity with the elixir of youth. As Mephistopheles looked on, the years fell from the wizard while foul apes sniggered. Next picture right here. The second act took place in a tavern where Faustus took pleasure in pain. Mephistopheles made healthy young men fight like beasts while safe in a corner. Faustus watched the blood spurt. Close to his shoulder, the demon smiled. And here is a chaotic picture. Mephistopheles' third act gratified Faustus' lust. On the high mountain peak, the demon showered the wizard with the trances of a witch's dance. While Faustus leered, his demon mused happily upon his own reward. Now, next chapter, I got another section right here, the tidings of the heavens, with some interesting artwork involving that. Yeah. about this talk. This brief talks about what the scholars and of wizards and sorcerers thought about what the heavens meant, the animals and the that make up the constellation, what all meanings they have. The Zodiac and such. The shadowy sisterhood. This one talks about the witches. This picture right here. Ordinary folk huddle fearfully in their beds when, with a rush of wind and a skirl of laughter, witches course the nighttime sky. So, workaday witchery, some of the things that witches are known to do, mostly malevolent. The familiars that they might have. Let's see. And of course, the various stories involving witchery. You take a look at the bottom of this page right here, see a long hair going around. You are familiar with this story of Rapunzel. And of course, I have a long side story on this, on that. I don't want to go through that. I'm about running out of room on my camera here. I don't have too much time. But talked about the various familiars and what use they could be in between the stories. Let's keep going. Snaring an earthbound demon. Don't know what it's about here, but yeah. So let's kind of move on here. Sorry if I don't read through all these, but hey, this might inspire you to get the book here. This section right here talks about the witch's garden, about what plants she can have and what use they can be of her. The secret of flight. Few witches ascribed their power of flight merely to the broom, distaffs, or farm implements that served as their nighttime steeds. The magical energies that transported them came partly from an ointment thickly smeared over their bodies that incorporated the most potent herbs in witchcraft, monkshood, henbane, deadly nightshade, mandrake, and hemlock, blended with other extracts in a base of lard, or, it was whispered, the fat of unbaptized children. The ingredients combined in a magical synergy, so powerful that witches, by their own accounts, were spirited across entire countries in a twinkling of an eye. And this page right here shows a cat and a snake, Pearson and his helpers, more different animals of familiars that witches can utify. Oh, of course, snake's down here. Wonderful little tidbit there. Yes. Wonderful picture of the horrors of witches bring each eve before the season changed. Prudent folks stayed close to home, and in the watches of the night they spoke of flocks of witches gone to dance in raging revelries and please themselves in frightful rites. And I'm afraid they don't present witches in a positive light, but that was very common in things back then. Let's see. A couple of frogs dancing. Belled and beribboned dancers. Ugly and venomous though it was, the toads seemed to have been among the most cherished of the witches' familiars. The creatures were dressed in velvet by their mistresses, ornamented with bells, and encouraged to dance. Common folk both feared and valued them. Toads were burned because the horns on their heads marked them as agents of Satan, and because witches used toad spittle to concoct ointments and confer invisibility. On the other hand, toads were admired for their ability to hear distant thunder long before the human ear could catch it. The sight of the little creatures making their way to safe water provided a reliable indicator of approaching storms. And very elderly toads, rarely glimpsed, carry precious jewels in their heads, effective antidotes to poison. Of course, a lot of that's not even true, you know. Catch of Charms is a little short story involving this box right here. These last few pages are to a story of the most famous witch of all Russia, Baba Yaga, who travels around in a mortar and pestle, using a broom to cover her tracks as she flies around. Of course, what tracks she leaves when she's flying is another matter. It talks about a young girl who is hated by her stepmother and her twisted, ugly stepmother and her stepsisters. So they sent her out to go to Baba Yaga and give her one of her skulls that's in front of her house. Baba Yaga's house is on a chicken leg, but the skulls in front of her house emit light. So she asked her to do that. It's very dangerous. But as she goes around, she starts to see 3 knights, one completely white, rider, horse, and armor and all. She sees another one in a fiery red, and then she sees the third one, all in black. she'll find out who these is because she goes to Baba Yaga and asks for it, and Baba Yaga, always hungry, sets her up with these tasks in which if she fails, she will eat her, but if she succeeds to her satisfactory, she will keep her alive and eventually give her what she's after. And, you know, Baba Yaga allowed her to ask a question. She asked who the three knights were. Well, the white one is my morning, the red one is my sun, and the black one's my night. Of course, when Baba Yaga asked her a question, vice versa, about how she was able to get all the chores done, because they seem kind of impossible, she said through her mother's blessings. I'll let you read the story here about what that means. Baba Yaga kicked her out immediately because she hated blessings and gave her a skull and told her go. And so here she is, this young maiden with a skull that emitted light. So she came back to her home and happy that her stepmother and her sisters were happy to be back, because when she was kicked out, none of the lights worked, in the house. No torch would stay, and candle would stay lit at all. So they were living in darkness the entire time. But they got a very unpleasant end with the skull on the, that emitted light. So she stepped out, and even through her sweetness and good deeds, she and her abilities to do very fine linen, she went to the Tsar, who fell in love with her, and she became a queen. So ever after. So there it is. Again, these are the bibliography. These are all the source of all the stories in his books, and also picture credits. So acknowledgments. Wonderful book. Hope you all enjoyed this. That is Wizards and Witches of Time-Life Books. Stay tuned for the next volume. I may choose, at random. They're not going to be in particular order, but I try to cover one book for each, one video for each of the books here. So enjoy. Thank you very much for watching.